Okay, I think we are live. Let me get this shared. Welcome, everyone. I see some of you joining us. I'm just getting this shared into the group. So go ahead and drop a comment below where you are watching from. We would love to see where you're joining us from today. Okay. All right, I think we are officially streaming everywhere. All right, welcome everyone to this month's TBI talk with Dr. Perry Maynard from Integrated Brain Centers located in Denver, Colorado. And this week or this month, we are talking all about hormones after a brain injury. And it's a topic that I think is very missed, very overlooked, very misunderstood, especially in the mainstream, medical world. So, welcome, Dr. Maynard. Excited to have you here and talking about this. I think you may have
Yes, thank you
frozen.
so much for having me, Amy. Am I back? Okay, yeah. Let me know. You know our internet. It's not always the best. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think this is a great topic, and honestly, a topic that I don't think is discussed a ton in the functional neurology world. The functional medicine world is all over hormones, but I think where we as a profession in functional neurology, I think sometimes we fail on this arena of looking at metabolic function, especially hormones. So I think this will be a really good topic to discuss.
Yeah, yeah. So, hormones are they run everything, right? Like our
Mhm.
hormones are really important to our overall health. Um, I think a lot of people don't understand, like, your blood sugar is regulated, it's a hormone. Um, and just all the functions of your body are run off of your hormones. And so after a brain injury, often, I'd say the vast majority probably have hormonal imbalances due to
Mhm.
their brain injury. So maybe you could explain just a little bit about how that works. Like, why do our hormones get out of whack after a brain
Yeah.
injury?
Yeah. No, great question. And this is actually funny because Terry and I were actually talking about this the other day. He actually called me and we got on this kind of chat after work one day, discussing the same mechanism, right? And this is really what's called the neuroendocrine system, right? So the brain's connection to the endocrine system, which is a majority of hormones. So within our brain, we have what's called the hypothalamus, which kind of sits somewhat kind of deep within, and in that hypothalamus, we have what's called the pituitary gland. And in the pituitary gland, we have an anterior or a forward portion, and then we have the posterior, right? And the anterior and posterior secrete different hormones. But really, the pituitary gland plays a huge role in regulation of things like cortisol uh, and blood pressure, kidney function. So the balance between sodium and potassium and magnesium, it plays a huge role in regulating of the thyroid gland, right? Right, all these different mechanisms. It has huge connections with regulating sex hormones, so things like testosterone and estrogen, right? All come from that neuroendocrine system. So a lot of times when we have a head injury, there's a few different mechanisms. One is if we go back to that pituitary gland, it's kind of like a stalk, right? So it comes out of the hypothalamus and then sits kind of like this as a stalk, and it goes through. a little kind of bony circle coming right down here. And some of the theories is that when a head injury occurs, that stalk, or what's called the infundibulum, that connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus, can become disrupted. So now the connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland becomes a little funky. So now your signaling to your thyroid becomes off. Your signaling to your pancreas becomes off. Your signaling to your kidneys come off, right? People get high blood pressure or low blood pressure, right? All of these different things. So there can be damage in that mechanism. The other aspect is sometimes head injuries, I shouldn't say sometimes, oftentimes, head injuries cause severe amounts of inflammation. And that inflammation can mess with the interaction between hormones and different receptors. And then what happens a lot of times is it becomes kind of a vicious cycle, because now you have dysregulation of let's say adrenal function, right? So now the brain's connection to your adrenal glands, right? And your adrenal glands are producing, right, glucocorticoids, right? All these different things that have to do with regulation of blood volume. So potassium, sodium, right? It plays somewhat a role in blood sugar regulation. And then all of a sudden you throw off blood sugar. And then that dysregulation in blood sugar now throws off your thyroid. Now the dysregulation of your thyroid. So it can all start with a brain injury that can cause endocrine dysfunction. And then that endocrine dysfunction then causes this vicious loop and cascade that can mess things up 10 steps down the line.
Yeah, yeah. And like you may have already had an underlying issue going on that you didn't even necessarily notice.
Mhm.
And then the brain injury just, amplifies so many things,
Yeah.
as most of us know. Um, so, how I kept telling doctors something was wrong. Like I gained a bunch of weight in the first few months after my brain injury, and I wasn't even eating. Like I wasn't even hungry. Like I had lost my appetite. And they would do blood work. They checked my thyroid, and is it TSH? Is that the right acronym?
Yep.
They checked
Yep.
my TSH, and it fell within the normal, right? Like I was at the high end of normal, but they're like, well, you're still within normal boundaries. And it's like, now doing all my own research and working with you guys and everything, like I understand normal to who, right? Um, your normal might
Yeah,
not
for sure.
fall within these numbers. Your normal might be here or here. And so how,
Yeah.
as a provider, as a practitioner, how do you guys go about like checking hormone ranges and because what you guys do is a way bigger picture than what you're going to get at even at an endocrinologist, let alone a GP.
Mhm.
Um, so what are you guys looking at in blood work that is helping you see the bigger picture of what's going on?
Yeah. So great question. Use thyroid as an example, just to even start. I mean, if you look at your, majority of practitioners or GPs, they'll run TSH and then they'll run T4 if you're lucky. So if we talk about
I
kind
had
of
to ask for that one.
yeah, if we talk about the pathway, so TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone, right? So it's released right from the pituitary gland, and it says, thyroid gland, give me more thyroid. So if your TSH is higher, it means your brain is signaling to your thyroid gland to make more thyroid, right? And so the signal comes down to your thyroid. You produce a majority of your T4, which is your inactive form of thyroid hormone, in your thyroid gland. And then you convert a majority of your T4 into T3 in your liver, in your GI tract, right? And and then you have to uptake it by tissues, right? So when you look at the differences, we don't just look at TSH or T4, we'll look at TSH, we'll look at T4, we'll look at T3, we'll look at the free hormones, because T4 and T3 are bound to proteins. And then you can look at the free component, and then we'll look at, is your body even able to use it? Because example is, once again, your T4 could be normal, but your T3 could be really low because you're not converting it because of either a liver or a gut issue or a blood sugar issue. Or maybe all those are normal, but your T3 uptake is really low. Well, we know that estrogen will bind to the same receptor preferentially and will limit the amount of thyroid you can uptake. So once again, someone could have fatigue, their TSH is fine, but they have excessive estrogen that's keeping their body, is decreasing their body's ability to utilize active form of thyroid hormone. So that's really the difference, is just looking at all the pathways, right? Is not just looking at TSH and assuming TSH is normal, therefore the thyroid is normal. I mean, a very common pattern you see with head injuries, and we call this a pituitary pattern, is where TSH is low and then all thyroid hormones are low. So you lose that feedback loop, right? And that's very common and notorious with head injuries, is that the feedback loop becomes a problem. So as T4 drops, it should signal to the brain and say, stimulate us more, and it doesn't. Everything's low. So the feedback loop between either the thyroid gland or the ovaries or the testes or the adrenal glands, that feedback between that organ and your brain isn't working, and it's literally like starving for more hormones, and your brain's like, nah, I can't really hear you, right? So sometimes you need to do things to improve that feedback between that mechanism. But that's really the big difference, is looking at the whole picture. The same thing goes for let's say male hormones, so testosterone. Well, we know that, right, testosterone comes from precursors. So we look at all the precursors that end up into testosterone. But then you don't want to just look at testosterone, you want to look at estrogen as well, because sometimes insulin resistance or diabetes can take testosterone in males and convert it into estrogen, right? Or these different pathways. So really you have to look at the whole pathway, and then depending on what the whole pathway is showing you, now learn what is that mechanism, versus just saying like, oh, your testosterone is low, let's give you more. Well, what if it's just you're insulin resistant and you're turning it all into estrogen? And if we fix your insulin resistance, you can now make your own testosterone. That's really the big difference.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so once you've, done this assessment and really looked at the whole picture, and how are some ways that you are helping patients, like you see their test results and your example, like let's just say their TSH is low, um, or their estrogen is low.
Mhm.
Like, what are some options that you have? How do you help patients? Oops, sorry if that was loud. How do you help patients who are struggling with hormonal imbalances, and probably didn't even know that that was their problem?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's a difficult one because everyone's different. So kind of like we talked about, is the mechanism is really key. So we may find somebody that improving their blood sugar stability or their insulin levels is what improves their hormones. Or we may need to improve detox pathways. So maybe someone has excessive estrogen that's limiting their ability to utilize thyroid hormone. Sometimes detoxing them and allowing them to clear estrogen allows them to utilize their thyroid better, right? Or, right, so sometimes you have to do things with detox, gut, a lot of times work on stabilizing blood sugar function. Inflammation is another big thing. Inflammation is going to completely hinder the endocrine system, right? Because think of it this way, is that if your body is in a stressful state, whether it's a lack of sleep, it's mental stress, it's physical stress, it's inflammation, all of these things are signals that now is not an optimal time to reproduce, for an example, right? So you'll see, like, I'll give you an example, is I see this a lot of times in females who do a ton of like fasting, right? Or long-term ketogenic diet. Is not uncommon to the thyroid gland become a little bit sluggish, right? And some of the theories is that when you fast for an extended period of time, and this doesn't mean that fasting is bad per se, it has to be utilized appropriately. Fasting stimulates to say to the body, hey, we're now in a point of starvation. So we need to decrease all metabolic activity as much as we can, right? So that's what you see with hormones as well. So we really need to figure out the mechanism of why. Why is their estrogen low? Maybe it's because their DHEA is low, right? Or maybe their progesterone is low because they're shuttling it all into cortisol, because they're really stressed out. Or maybe it's because of inflammation. So we really need to figure out the mechanism and then fix the underlying mechanism and try to allow things to come into sync. Sometimes we will give progesterone, sometimes we will give estrogen, sometimes we will give testosterone, but that's usually not the first thing that we do. We
Mhm.
try to optimize as many things as possible. And if we can't get those things back online and we need to do some sort of hormone replacement, then that's, if that person is the candidate for it, it's not a bad thing. But I don't think that that should be the first step. And
Yeah.
far too often is literally the first thing is you have low T, let's shoot you up with some testosterone.
Yep. Yep. And I think, it's like so many other things with brain injury. You need to get to the root of the problem
Hmm.
before you can fix all the other stuff up here, right? And
Yep.
so if your hormones are totally out of whack, you have to get down to that root and what's causing that.
Yep.
And, I know for me, upping my protein
Yep.
was a really huge benefit to me, and it was like pretty immediate too that I noticed changes. um, I would start like first thing in the morning is I would have a high protein breakfast and
Hmm.
then high protein snacks throughout the day, so like I would just make like little protein balls, simple to just pop in your mouth and snack on it, right?
Yeah.
um, and like I said, I noticed a difference just in like a week. Um, so for me, upping protein was a huge uh, factor for me.
Hmm.
And like you said, everybody's different, and that's what I think is so challenging in the traditional system. In the
Hmm.
traditional system, it's very cookie cutter, right? Oh, this is high or this is low. This is the pill you take, or this
Yep.
is the supplement you take. Um, they're not getting to that root, and they're not treating each individual based on, like you can have a whole lot of factors going on, right? You can have a
Yeah.
brain injury, you can be in perimenopause or postmenopause, or,
Yeah.
like there's just so many variables that you can't have a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, no, you really can't. I mean, you can. People do it. I mean, we had a patient, and honestly, I think Shane and I would agree on this, is that you see the equal and opposite thing, even in the functional medicine arena or the longevity arena, of the amount of older men or postmenopausal female on tons of hormones, right? And I don't think hormone replacement is a bad thing per se. It can be very helpful. But I have a patient recently who was like, we got her labs back in, her testosterone was like through the roof, like the level of, once again, like a male's, and all of the
Wow.
hormones were just crazy through the roof. And she was having these anxiety attack and panic attacks, and it's just, and this was from like an anti-aging doctor, and a lot of times you'll see this, and they just think is more is better, and it's like, there there's a reason that, once again, these things happen, right? It's kind of like I was talking to a patient with this too, is in regards to menstrual cycles. It's like the menstrual cycles occur for a reason, right? We want to have healthy, regular menstrual cycles. Now, once again, I know it's easy as a male for me to say this, right? Um, but I see a lot of patients on like IUDs or different things or different shots, and they literally haven't had a cycle in a year. And I would argue, I don't know how good that is. What's occurring to your hormones, right? And it's the same thing after menopause, is that I think having hormone replacement is good, but I think jacking everyone's hormones through the roof to try to make them, have the libido of an 18-year-old at 70, I don't know if that's always the best thing. And I don't know if we know, right? Because things are changing. And like we talked about, is that when you go through menopause, that feedback between your brain and your ovaries, for example, it becomes less connected. So if all of a sudden you start driving hormones, what is that going to do to the brain, right? And that feedback loop. So it happens in the alternative world as well, of just give more hormones, or once again, you're 60, you're 70, well, let's make you like you're 18 again, which would be great, but I don't know if that's always the best option.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, for women, well, first of all, I know there's a ton of research going into when you have your brain injury in your menstrual cycle. Like
Yeah.
there's actually I forget what phase that you're in that actually helps protect your brain. And so you're
Yeah.
less likely to have more severe symptoms, which is fascinating. Um, but I hear from so many women who their periods completely change after
Hmm.
their brain injury, whether it gets heavy or it goes away
Yep.
or they become painful.
Yep.
And all of those things are a sign that something's going on. Like
Yeah.
periods aren't supposed to be painful.
Yep.
Um, and they're supposed to be regular, within within that month window. Um, and you know what do you say to the women watching who have had a change in their menstrual cycle, um, and they don't really think much of it, like
Hmm.
like we don't always make that connection right away, right
Yeah.
after a brain injury, because like why would our period change from a brain injury?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just kind of like when people are like, well, why would my digestion change? Like all of a sudden, why am I getting these weird things? Is that I think you made the perfect kind of point, is that there's something going on. A lot of times I think sometimes people chalk it up to like, it's a little bit, it's not too big of a deal.
Or it's
But the
just
problem,
stress.
yeah, or stress, or once again, which is I always find fascinating is people, we always say, well, it's just stress, but what do we actually do to address that stress? A lot of times I think we use stress as an escape to give a reason of why something's happening, but we don't need to necessarily really address it. So knowing that there is a mechanism going on, right? And going back to it, it's really important because this goes back to later on, like we talked about, is that we know that these hormones are very neuroprotective, right? So estrogen is extremely neuroprotective. There's a reason why postmenopausal women are far more likely to develop things like Alzheimer's, right? And some of the theories is around estrogen drops, things like that. We know that estrogen and progesterone play a huge role in neurochemistry. So production of dopamine, serotonin, GABA. So going back to like PMS, right? In mood changes and mood shifts. I mean, it's not uncommon to see individuals, during ovulation, is they're happy, everything's great, they feel great. And then they go into their after ovulation into the luteal phase, and all of a sudden they become majorly depressed and flat in brain fog, right? And you're saying, what is that doing to your brain, right? That's affecting neurochemistry. And then all of a sudden they get put on an SSRI, right? And they're getting put on this antidepressant when really it's these fluctuation in hormones that are then secondarily affecting neurochemistry. So, and I'd say the biggest thing is try to address these things earlier, because the longer they go untreated, the harder they become, right? If you started getting these irregularities and it's only been a few months, or things like that, it's much easier than 3 years later, right? Because now you're looking at plasticity that's been built in a circuit between your ovaries and your brain, and that becomes the new normal. So I'd say it's never too early to get help, and to reach out and try to get on top of things. It makes it much easier to fix than waiting
Yeah.
6 months to a year.
And that you just made such an interesting point about depression and PMS and antidepressants. Um, if we go back in history, women were often written off as hysterical and institutionalized,
Yep.
and they just had hormone imbalance.
Right.
um, and like I know for myself, I become more aware, like why am I so crabby today? Like even I'm making myself crabby, and then I'm like, "Oh, PMS,"
Yeah.
right? Like and the depression too. Like I don't think women actually realize how much their period plays into their depression.
Totally.
And you know, and then again, got to get back down to the root of it, right?
Hmm.
And what's causing that. And it all comes back down to hormonal imbalance or inflammation or, you know, so I hope that that's a good takeaway today for women
Hmm.
watching, is really paying attention to your cycle and that depression.
Hmm.
And like you said, then they get put on an antidepressant, and it's not fixing the problem at all, for one.
No.
And, it's, yeah. Um,
Yeah. I think that's a great point too. And this is what I always tell people is pay attention to what are your symptoms or your chief complaint due throughout the month. Like if you are noticing noticeable changes in your migraines, in your headaches, in your dizziness, in your mood, like throughout your cycle, and it's always better in one time versus the other, like that's a huge clue. If you're like, I get migraines every time throughout this point of the cycle, it's a huge clue that there's hormones behind it. If you're saying, once again, my mood is great at this point, but I become super depressed at this point, that's a huge clue that something's going on in your hormones. And then most of the time, if you can regulate those and get those, stable, or we can find out what's driving that, there's not a need for these other interventions that come with far more risk. And the other thing too is that you're fixing the main problem, and there's really no risk to getting hormones optimized besides feeling better.
right, right. Um, so let's talk about the male hormones a little bit. We just spent a bit of time talking about the female hormones. Um, I think often men don't even comprehend. Like, it's just not something. So, as females, we know all about hormones because we get our period. But men, it's often, I mean, other than your raging hormones in your teenage years, men often don't even think about hormones, right? Like, it's not
No, they
top of
don't. I
mind.
think No, I think men only think of hormones in regards to like, I want to get like muscles and I want to be jacked. You know what I mean? That's probably the stereotypical male, like that's maybe into fitness, is like, how can I get bigger muscles? How can I get more ripped? But they don't pay attention or once again, they don't pay attention until it affects their sex drive or their body composition, right? Some of these are a little bit maybe more superficial things, but they don't realize that their mood,
Yeah.
brain fog, energy, all those things. Once again, motivation. Testosterone plays a huge role in dopamine production, right? And dopamine and regulate. And the thing is too that a lot of these hormones don't even help with production. They play a role in tuning the receptors in the brain. So if you think about it, if you have a receptor in the brain for testosterone, it helps to tune it in and make it more sensitive. So it stimulates it better. So dopamine is all about motivation. I feel good. I do something, I want to do it again, right? This is what a lot of nicotine and drugs hit, right? Or addictions, I don't think realize that their mood, their motivation, their change in personality, their agitation can be related to those things, right? Because we don't have a cycle, so we don't notice maybe these
Right. Right.
fluctuations. Although males do have fluctuations,
Yeah.
there's some really interesting research. I don't know a ton, but when you look at even like pregnancy and males with the pregnancy and the female, and hormones changing and testosterone levels changing throughout pregnancy and even birth and childbirth. So I think there's more than men we give our credit to of fluctuations.
Right.
Um, but yeah, a lot of males, like I said, don't pay attention until later stages, or once again, or they're just looking for a better body composition. But it plays such a huge role in neurochemistry, testosterone. And then the other thing too is that men don't pay attention to as much as that the once again dietary patterns, stress patterns, is that you can take that testosterone and you can convert it into estrogen, right? So it's just as important in men to, if your testosterone is low, there's usually a reason, right? Whether it's diet related, inflammation, head injury, something going on from a standpoint of poor nutrition, so they're not getting the precursors to make testosterone, inactivity. Physical exercise and resistance training can be one of the best things to improve testosterone in a male, right? Is actually weightlifting and lifting heavy, um, along with other different precursors. So there's so many things to do before running to testosterone replacement, because the big thing is once you're on it, you really have to stay on it, and it's hard to come off and regulate that cycle because you're going to affect that connection between the brain. So yeah, like I said, men don't really realize it unless it's affecting their libido or they want to get bigger muscles.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dr. Perry, thank you so much for being here today. This is a topic we could talk for hours on, I think. Um, but what would be your key takeaway to anyone watching today? If they're just curious, like, gosh, maybe it is my hormones. What would be your top top tip today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it might be a few. I think one, going back to females, pay attention. What is happening throughout your cycle. So take your top, three symptoms and say, does it change? Does it get better or worse at any point in the month? And see if you can triangulate a specific time. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And then the other is just, um, you know, get your hormones tested. It's not that expensive and it's not that difficult. I mean, you could get a full hormone panel via saliva, men or female, for maybe a little over $100, in blood or saliva. So I always tell people too, is like, even if you feel good, once or twice a year, run your hormones, see
Yeah.
where they're at, keep them good, optimize them, see the trends before it becomes a thing. If all of a sudden you start seeing over the last 2 years, testosterone is declining, make an intervention before all of a sudden
Yep.
you once again have no libido, or you're super fatigued, or your motivation is gone. So that'd be my other thing, is just check your hormones. It's really not that expensive. And then once again, from a female standpoint, is just pay attention. Do you notice changes in your cycle?
Hmm. Yeah, great advice. And anyone who is interested in connecting with you, they can find you at integratedbraincenters.com, and they can schedule a free consultation with you too, a phone consult, if they're
Yeah.
interested in working further with you, correct?
Yep, 100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone for watching. If you're watching this on the replay, go ahead, drop a question below. We'll try to get to it in the comments. And thanks for watching.
Thanks.